Hello, welcome to finals season. I've been getting a lot of requests lately for a video that really breaks down and explains what the X method is doing to help you factor your quadratic equation. So this is a back to basics, like one step at a time, why this technique works. Ready? Let's go. So let's say we are asked to factor the equation x squared plus 2x minus 8. All right, what they're asking us to find is the places where this quadratic equation will cross the x-axis, right? A quadratic looks like a parabola. This one is in x, so we know it opens up and down on the y-axis. And so assuming that its roots are real, then it will cross the x-axis at two places. And in factoring, that's what we're looking to find, is what are the value of those two places. All right, quadratic equations are formed by multiplying two binomials together. So for right now, I'm going to just call those x plus p and x plus q. And I know that my p or my q might be positive or negative. In fact, because I see a negative here, I know that one of them is negative and one of them is positive. But for right now, I'm going to just call it that to show you how these two binomial factors multiply together to create this quadratic, and how we will work backward from the quadratic to figure out what goes in our parentheses there. So if I were to multiply these out, and I'm going to use the method of FOIL. If you're not familiar with that, go take a look at this video. But FOIL stands for firsts, outsides, insides, lasts, and that refers to the positions within the parentheses. So first I'm going to multiply the first two things in each parentheses. An x times an x gets me an x squared. Now I'm going to multiply the outsides of my whole parenthetical situation. So that's the x is the outermost here, and the q is the outermost here. Now I'm going to multiply the insides. The p and the x are the inmost. And finally, I'm going to multiply the lasts. The p and the q are the last in each parentheses. And I see here I have two terms that are both x's, right? qx plus px. If that said like 2x plus 4x, that would be 6x. You added the 2 and the 4. So I do the same thing with the q and the p to get x squared plus q plus px plus pq. And so now I can see that to go from my equation here, x squared plus 2x minus 8, to figuring out what my p and my q are, that means I'm asking myself what multiplies to negative 8 and adds to positive 2. And that is what the X method is based on. So this is how you now use the X method, now that I've explained why we're using the X method. You make an X on your page to keep track of things. Up top goes what you're multiplying to. Down below goes what you're adding to. And in here, we're going to figure out what multiplies to negative 8 and adds to positive 2. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the multiplies, and I'm going to make myself a factor list. I'm going to ignore the negative positive for a second. So 1 times 8 gets me an 8. 2 times 4 gets me an 8. And the next thing I would write would be 4 times 2, which is a repeat. So I now know I have found all my factor possibilities. Now I'm going to think about that negative positive. If I am multiplying to a negative, only one of these is negative, right? Because a negative times a negative would get me a positive. Okay. When I add, I need it to be positive. It adds to a positive 2. That only happens if the larger of my factors is positive, right? If the larger of my factors is negative, then when I add, it's going to stay negative. So that means those guys are the one that get assigned the negative, right? Negative 1 times 8, negative 8. Negative 2 times 4, negative 8. And now I say, Which of these two scenarios adds up to positive 2? Well, it's not that guy. That adds to positive 7. So it's this. And these two numbers go in here, minus 2 and 4. And those two numbers are my P and my Q, and those are my factors. Now, if you're asked for zeros, that wants to know what are the values of these 2 points here. So if this equals 0, that only happens when this equals 0 or this equals 0. So if x minus 2 equals 0, then I add 2 to both sides and x equals 2. That's the point 2, 0. That's one of my zeros. Same thing here. X plus 4 equals 0. That means x would be negative 4. And so negative 4, 0 and 2, 0 are my two zeros. And x minus 2, x plus 4 are my two factors. Okay, so that's step 1 of factoring and why and how the X method is helpful. Let's do another X method example just to give you some practice on a different problem. So let's say our quadratic is x squared minus 9x plus 18. Okay, I'm going to go straight to my X method here now that I've explained why it works. And I remember that on top goes the C, or what it's multiplied to. On the bottom goes the B, or what it's added to. Right? What multiplies to positive 18 and adds to negative 9. Next step, I want my factors of 18. I want to know what multiplies to 18. 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6, and that's it because 4 doesn't go into it, 5 doesn't go into it, and by 6, I'm at a repeat, 6 and 3. Okay, now let's talk about positive and negative. This multiplies to a positive number, so either they're both positive or they're both negative, but it adds to a negative number, so they're both negative. Okay, and once I do that, it's pretty obvious. Negative 3 plus negative 6 gets me the negative 9 I'm looking for. Those go in there, and now I can figure out my factors. So those are my factors, which means my zeros are 3 and 6, and that is the X method for quadratics where my coefficient of my X term is 1. So this method is called the box method, and I like this particularly for visual learners. Okay, so what the box method does is it creates basically a multiplication matrix. Okay, so we know that our first term is going to be a 2x squared, and we know that our last term is going to be a minus 12. And then we know that our middle term is made up of two things that are added together. So essentially, we're going to do a little bit of trial and error to figure out what completes our multiplication matrix. 2x squared, we're in luck because really that can only be a 2x and an x. And it doesn't matter where we put them. And now we're going to play a little. Negative 12. Well, we know that can be constructed using 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4, and we know we need to get a negative onto one of those terms, right? Multiplication to a negative means 1 is negative. And again, since our negative 5, we know these guys add up to negative, the larger terms will be our negatives, and now we play a little. So let's say I start by playing with 1 and 12, and so I throw in 1 and negative 12. 1 times negative 12, that gets me my negative 12. But 2x times negative 12, negative 24x, 1 times x, x. And if I add my x and my negative 24x, I do not get my 5x. So let's say I reverse them. 2x times 1, negative 12 times x. And again, negative 12x plus 2x doesn't get me my negative 5x. I'm going to try something else. So let's say I try my 2 and my 6. 2x times negative 6, 2 times x, 2 x plus negative 12x doesn't get me my 5x. Let me try reversing them. 2x times 2, negative 6 times x, negative 6x plus 4x does not get me my negative 5x. It's got to be this guy. 2x times negative 4x, 3 times x, 3x plus minus 8x gets me my negative 5x, one of my factors. is 2x plus 3. The other one of my factors is x minus 4 factored. And you always have the quadratic formula. Don't know your quadratic formula? Take a look at this video, which is me singing it. It will stay in your head, I promise, whether you want it to or not. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Yes, that's right. To hear me sing it, you have to actually click on that link. Okay, so then I just fill in my numbers where that's my a, that's my b, that's my c, right? Negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times 2. And then you just math that stuff out, right? Negative 12 times 2 is negative 24. Negative 24 times 4 is negative 96. Minus 96 is plus 96. 96 plus 25 is 121. The square root of 121 is 11. 2 times 2 is 4. 5 plus 11 is 16 over 4. 5 minus 11 is minus 6 over 4. This answer gets you your roots, and then from there, you have to work backward to find your factors. So your factors in this case would be x minus 4 and x plus 1.5, but something's wrong because you know that those two things don't multiply to a 2x up top. So you have to multiply one of these guys by 2. And by trial and error, if you multiply this one by 2 and get 2x minus 8, you do not end up with this as your parabola, whereas if you multiply this one by 2, you get 2x plus 3. So quadratic formula is great if what you're looking for is your roots. If what you're looking for is your factors, I think it's a little more effective to use one of the factoring methods. Now, that gives you 3 different methods here. You've got the X method, your quadratic equation, you have your box method. There are others. Take a look at my factoring playlist. You've got the Poche-and-Low method. You've got completing the square method. You've got the equating of coefficients method. So go ahead and work your way through my factoring channel now that you've had a basic explanation of what factoring is, what we're trying to accomplish by factoring, and the difference between factors and zeros. And see which method appeals to you for individual problems. There are even some videos on the playlist that say which method should I use for this problem. So take a look at that as well. All right, leave any questions or comments you have in the comments. Consider subscribing to my channel so you know when I put out a new video. And as always, keep on mathing.